Hello again, this is Lee Griffin. This is our volleyball officiating 2020-21 for the Triangle Officials Association. This will be our clinic number 5. I'm going to go through rules 11 and 12 for timeouts and intermissions and conduct. All right, let's go through rule 11, timeouts and intermissions. First of all, there are two types of timeouts. There's both charged timeouts, and that's timeouts the teams call, and there's referees timeouts. When we have a referee's timeout, we can have it for any reason. We'll just call that, use the normal timeout signal with the hands in the T formation, and then put hands to the shoulders or your shoulders, and that will be a timeout for the referees. And you can call it at any time that you need it for whatever purpose, be it an injury or anything else. So if we have a charged timeout, that's one that's requested by either the head coach or the playing captain. In almost all cases, the head coach will call it, but the playing captain is permitted to. And in high school, you will rarely see the captain do it, but in some high-end situations, the captain will be calling the timeouts. When can you call a timeout? Well, you can call it any time when the ball is dead. Right, it can be either even before the set starts, as long as the R1 is not signaled for serve. Once the R1 signals for serve, a point must be played before any timeout could be granted. You get 2 per set per team, and you can have them called consecutively, either by the same team or by the opposing teams. You could, in fact, have all 4 timeouts in a row if the teams wanted that. And the second, the timeouts that are charged last at most 60 seconds. They can be shorter, and they should be, if possible, visibly timed. So we'll see in volleyball that we use the clock for timing these times that aren't part of play, but we want to make sure they're timed visibly if possible. If not, that's part of the reason both the R1 and R2 are required to wear a watch, and you use your watch to time that 60 seconds. We'll go through how to administer all that now. Okay, so during the charged timeout, a team can confer at the bench, or they can confer out on the court. They can get water, et cetera, et cetera. They cannot go to another area to confer. They have to stay in the area of the bench or the court. If they go outside of that, that would be an unnecessary delay, and we'd penalize for that. So at the beginning and end of the timeout period, the R2 is going to signal the number of timeouts used by each team with hands held at shoulder height, shoulder to head height. Okay. And when that timeout occurs, the R1 has a chance to relax for a second or two. The R2 has lots of responsibilities. You need to make sure the score sheet or sheets match the scoreboard. If you have sheets, make sure the sheets match each other. Make sure if there are multiple sheets that the number of substitutions match, and make sure that the score sheet is internally consistent. And by that I mean that the individual scores, the chronological order of the scores that's being recorded matches the running tally, and that matches what we're displaying on the visible scoreboard. And make sure your team, your officials at the table are okay. Everybody's fine with what's going on. Okay. So you only have a few seconds to do that, so you need to do that as quickly as you can. Okay, so the procedure we're going to use is either the R1 or the R2 are going to recognize the timeout called by either the head coach or the playing captain with a whistle if by the R1 and a double whistle if by the R2, give the timeout signal. And then the non-whistling referee is going to mirror the signals, but not, of course, blow the whistle. Only have one whistle blow. So the R2 is going to signal the number of timeouts used by each team with hands held at shoulder height. It's timeouts used by each team. Okay. R2 is going to remind the timer to start the clock. They oftentimes will not. They'll have the 1 minute on the clock, but won't start when we call the timeout. Ask them to start the clock, and then check that score sheet that we talked about on the previous slide. And then one last thing you're supposed to do by rule, and that's confirm with the tracker whether or not the liberos are on or off the court. And you do that because when they go back out on the court, sometimes teams will send the libero out, even though she had not been in the set when they went off the court. And they need to do the libero replacement. That exchange needs to occur after the timeout ends and not before where they just run straight off the bench. You need to do that after the timeout ends to do a replacement, or in either way, either libero on or off. And that's for both teams. Okay, continuing on with the procedure. After 45 seconds have elapsed, 15 more seconds to go. If both teams aren't ready to play, then the R2 is going to double whistle to give the teams a warning that the timeout is just about complete. If the R2 is still busy with the table, the R1 should do that with a single whistle. Only one whistle again, just one warning. Okay. And then at 60 seconds, or earlier, if we determine the teams are ready to play, the R2 will ask the timer to stop the clock, end that visual signal, and to signal with the horn. And that horn actually will end the timeout. Okay. Now that if you do end the timeout early, make sure both teams are ready to play. Okay. Oftentimes they'll have all the players out there but one, and the libero will still be talking to the coach, or the setter will still be over there talking with the coach. And seem like we're in too big a hurry to end that timeout, which was only a minute, in 30 seconds. Don't do that. Make sure the coach has finished their coaching before we blow the whistle and then blow the horn to indicate that the timeout is complete. Okay. And then the R2 is going to show the number of timeouts used. Again, timeouts used by each team with hands at head height. And then if a team has used 2 timeouts, then the R2 is going to inform the coach that you've used 2 timeouts. And then the R2 needs to scan both benches to make sure there's no water or anything on the floor, that in fact we're ready to start. And if that's the case, then while he or she's standing on the receiver side of the net, then return the control back to R1. Okay, so you can see the R2 is going to be hustling during timeouts. If they're really doing all these things, they're going to be hustling, get this done. But really make sure you check both benches before you return control to the R1, because there oftentimes will be water and stuff on the floor there. We need to make sure that is corrected for safety's sake. Okay. So that's our process. Okay. And remember, we said that the teams have to confer at the team bench, and this is for any kind of timeout. They can stay in the bench area or on their side of the court. They are allowed to go onto the court and in fact could have their team meeting out there, or the coach could walk out there and talk to them, or they could just stand there, whatever they want to do on their side of the court. If they do anything else, like go outside the gym and have a meeting, that would be unnecessary delay. Okay. If they request a third timeout, remember, we're going to tell them after they've used both timeouts. The R2 is going to do that. If they request a third timeout, we're not going to award the timeout, and we're going to reward them with a penalty of unnecessary delay. Now, use your judgment on this, obviously. And if the coach says, "Do I have a timeout?" Say, "No, coach, you don't." And they'll say, "Coach, and you've used both of them." And even if they say timeout, say, "Coach, you already used both. You don't ask me for it." And they're like, "Okay." If they yell it out timeout where everybody in the gym hears it, well, you're going to have to penalize if it was the third timeout. This is a very rare occurrence, but if it does happen, just do the unnecessary delay. Remember, if it's the first set, it's just the yellow card, the yellow unnecessary delay, and there's really no penalty. That's just a warning. Okay. Now, the timeouts do also have a provision for what's called reviewing decisions. This is not a common occurrence, but you need to know how to handle it if a coach asks for it. Okay. So a coach can rise and ask for this, or be standing and ask for a timeout to review a decision. Okay. And the time, if they ask for that, we will grant the timeout, even if the team has no timeouts remaining. And it can be used only to review a situation that has immediately preceded. If another point has been played, then the situation can no longer be reviewed. To do the review, the head coach goes and confers with the R1 at the R1 platform. The R1 stays on the platform and listens to what they have to say. And we will start the 1 minute timer. At the end of the 1 minute timer, the R1's going to make a decision. So the head coach only has 1 minute to make their case to the R1. The other team can confer as they would during any other normal charge timeout. Okay. Now, after the head coach has made this appeal, I guess, to the R1, the R1 can change the ruling if they agree that with what the head coach has had to say. The R2 would then inform the opposing coach. Will change the whatever the change was will be recorded on the score sheet, and then there will be no timeout charged to the team. The timeout reverts to what's called a referee's timeout, which we have as many timeouts as we need. Okay. If there is not a change to the ruling that the head coach is appealing, the team will be charged a timeout. Okay, and they have used the timeout. That minute has now expired. Right. If they don't have any timeouts, then it's going to be a loss of rally point to the opponent. Okay, so this is a case where the additional timeout, because it wasn't just requested, we granted it. The penalty is more severe than the unnecessary delay. The penalty in this case is loss of rally point to the opponent. Okay, this is not very common. I've never been approached as the R1 for this, but I have seen it happen. All right. The other case we have for timeouts is when we have an injury. All right. And the main thing, remember, about the entire situation is when we have a player that's injured, their injury is the most important thing we need to make sure is handled. So do not ask that they be removed or anything like that. We're going to let the trainer, the coach, or the emergency personnel decide when it is safe to remove them from the court and the playable area. And once, remember, we just declared the playable area before the match, at our pre-match conference. And so if they're in that area and it's unsafe to move them, we're not going to start the match again until they are able to be safely removed. Okay, and potentially any blood or whatever that might be involved cleaned up. Okay, so once they are removed from the playable area, you can then we'll continue play with either a replacement or substitution. Either of those would be allowed as long as they're legal, right? If it's a replacement, they'd have to be on the back row, for example. Okay, there's no need to follow the substitution or replacement procedure in that case, right? We've already had an interruption, we have an injury, and then the replacement or substitution, we just make sure that gets recorded by the table, and then we would continue play. If the interruption is less than 30 seconds, the player can continue, right? So girl goes up, twists her ankle. She's really hurting. So when that happens, we're going to call timeout. We're going to do a timeout rep for the officials. We're going to start, just check your watch. Look, we're going to, after about 30 seconds, if she's able to play, and we're going to ask the captain or the coach, is she going to be able to play? And then, we're going to take it from there. If she's able to play, then we're just going to continue play on. Okay, if it's within 30 seconds. Same thing if there was blood. So if a player has a blood or exposed wound, we're going to stop play. We're not going to ask that they be replaced. We're going to give the team 30 seconds to correct it. Right? So if you've got, scratch and got some blood, the trainer comes out, cleans that up, puts a Band-Aid or some sort of bandage over it. Well, if we do that, they do that within 30 seconds, then the player can continue to play, and there is no penalty or anything. They just continue to play. Okay. If it's more than 30 seconds, there's a couple things that can happen. The team could when you say, Coach, are is she going to be able to play? The team has the option to call one or more of their timeouts if they want to delay the decision, right? So she's twisted her ankle. She's almost there. She's the best outside hitter. It's down to the last point. Coach says, I'm going to use one of my timeouts. So the team would be allowed to call their timeout, even though we haven't made a decision about the injury, whether or not the player will be replaced or not. Okay. And at the end of the timeout or two timeouts, then the decision has to be made. And this is all after the player has been removed from the court. Okay. Now, they can also substitute for the player, obviously. And again, if they're in the back row, the libero could replace them if it had been a legal replacement. Okay. There is a special situation. So if a team only had 6 players or did not have any substitutes, okay. In that case, if a player is injured, after we do the 30 seconds, we're going to call an additional 3-minute timeout. And again, we're going to time this discreetly with our watch. Okay. We're going to tell both teams we have a special injury timeout of 3 minutes to allow for recovery. Okay. And so we're going to do that. And if the player's ready to play before the 3 minutes expires, then we're going to go ahead and restart the play. If at the end of 3 minutes, this is the additional 3 minutes, so 3 minutes and 30 seconds. If the player still cannot return, then the team would have to play without a player in that position for the remainder of the set. Okay. This is only if they have no substitutes, either legal or exceptional. In other words, they only have 6 players on the team and one has been injured. Then they would be allowed to continue to play with 5 players. And when that position rotates to the serve, they are going to, the penalty would be enforced of loss of rally side out to the other team. Okay. That player could return in a subsequent set. They could not return in that set, even if they were to later, before the set was out, if they were to recover. Now, this is only in the case of this special injury timeout that they would not be allowed to return. Okay. And you can only have this special injury timeout once per match per player. So again, a team with 6 players, we've granted the special injury timeout in the first set. The player sat out. If we do the special injury timeout again, it could not be for that same player. So we can't have this could go on and on and on. So, but the player could come back in a subsequent set. All right, so that covers timeouts. Let's talk a little bit about intermissions. Remember, the interval between sets is 3 minutes, and we're going to visibly time that. Again, we can end it early if both teams are ready to play. Now, we're not going to start until they're actually ready to play. Okay, and we can have the additional intermission, which would be 2 additional minutes between sets 2 and 3, or 1 and 2 for a 3-set match. And remember, that can only occur if host management or the head coach informs us beforehand, and we cover that at the pre-match conference, and it has to be for a promotional or special recognition. Interestingly enough, the intermission, if there is the intermission, is one of the times where the R1 is allowed to vacate the stand. In other words, if it's going to be 5 minutes instead of the 3, you as R1 can leave the referee's platform. You're not required to, but if you think it's appropriate, given whatever recognition they're doing, you're allowed to do that. You are not to leave the platform between sets otherwise. And while I'm at it, the only other time that you should consider leaving the platform is if there's going to be an injury where there will be a prolonged interruption, or a circumstance such as the lights go out, things like that. That would be the only other times that as R1 you should ever leave the stand. And I should say also that when I'm talking about R1 here, it's when you're the R1 and there is an R2. If you're also serving as the R2, then you obviously have to do the R2's duties, which require you to vacate the stand and go over to the table between sets. All right. During the interval between sets, teams can use balls to warm up in their playing area, but they can't hit the balls over the net. Can't do any hitting practice, but they can use balls. I have never seen that occur, but it is permitted. And of course, they can stay out on the court between sets on their side of the net. All right, that concludes Rule 11, timeouts and intermissions. All right, let's discuss Rule 12, conduct. Typically, volleyball has less unsporting conduct than other sports. Part of that's because we are really not tolerant of it, and it's particularly in the North Carolina High School Athletic Association. There's a big emphasis on sportsmanship and just not tolerating things such as vulgarities. I did include the actual definition of unsporting conduct directly from the rule book. Let me just read that. Unsporting conduct includes actions that are unbecoming to an ethical, fair, and honorable individual. It consists of acts of deceit, disrespect, or vulgarity, and includes taunting. All right, so this conduct expectation is going to apply to all players, all teammates, all head coaches, and other coaches, and anyone else on the bench. Remember, we said those were all considered team members. We expect them to not participate in unsporting conduct. Okay. It's also, by definition, unsporting conduct includes use of any tobacco or alcohol or e-cigarettes or similar products. So we'll need to make sure we penalize that if that occurs. I've never seen that occur at a high school match. It would also include willful acts such as refusing to play or refusing to follow procedures. Again, if that happens, we've pretty much lost control of the match. I've never seen that occur, thank goodness. But some things I have seen occur. So the way I've structured this is I'm going to go through assistant coaches first, because assistant coaches have some things they're allowed to do. And of course, the head coach can do any of these things and a few more. But let's start with what an assistant coach can do. And this would be on the bench. And they have to remain seated, except for some very specific things they're allowed to do. So during the dead ball, they could stand to ask to review the score, make sure the score that's visibly displayed matches the score books. They could verify the number of timeouts used. They request the serve order for their team, or they could verify the server of their opponent. Basically, the things that the captain on the floor could also do. They'll do that sometimes. More likely, they could stand to greet a replaced player. Usually, they're going to coach them up when they come off. They can obviously stand during timeouts to confer, and they can react spontaneously to an outstanding play by a player on their team. There is a point of emphasis this year that the spontaneous reactions need to be that and not these kind of ongoing reactions for players like, run up to the edge of the court and stuff like that. We rarely see that, but if it happens, we're gonna not allow that. It just has to be a spontaneous reaction to an outstanding play. And if the referees grant permission, obviously an assistant coach can go off the bench to attend to an injured player. Okay. So this is for assistant coaches, not head coaches, just assistants. Okay. So the head coach has all of those privileges. All right. In addition, during play, they can stand in the libero replacement zone at least 6 feet away from court and coach their players. Okay. They can move closer to the court while the dead ball occurs between plays. But when the R1 raises his or her arm to indicate they're about to blow the whistle for serve, the coach must move back immediately 6 feet or more away from the court and must stay away from the court during play. Okay. Now, if a red unsporting conduct is issued to anyone on the bench, basically the head coach, assistants, any of the players on the court that I'm sorry, players not on the court, other statisticians, et cetera, that are on the bench. If a red unsporting is issued to any of those, the head coach is going to lose the privilege to stand to coach players. Okay, this is a rule change from last year. Previously, that was a yellow unsporting conduct, but now it's a red unsporting conduct, right? And when we have that, we're going to be a point side out to the other team. We're going to remind the coach that he or she must be seated for the rest of the match. And they obviously can still respond to outstanding play. They can also rise to request a timeout or substitution. And remember, if they ask for a timeout to review a decision, they could confer with the officials. In other words, they could go to the R1 stand during that timeout to confer with the R1. Okay, but only when we've issued the red card did they lose that privilege to stand and coach their players. Again, only the head coach. Okay. So just a list of things that you could consider um, as unsportsmanlike conduct, and this is to everybody on the bench. Um, it can be, it's anything in your judgment. Remember that definition that I went through is very broad as to what you could consider to be unsporting, but you decide what unsporting means. But there are a couple where I think we need to be very, particularly now that the issuing a yellow card for unsporting conduct is not going to remove the opportunity for the head coach to stand. I think we should be a little more strict on things like questioning a referee's judgment, right? When a coach keeps asking for a double hit and you didn't see a double hit, we need to shut that down. That's not adding anything of value to the match. So let's just go through these quickly. If you tried to disconcert an opponent, so when I played basketball, I was taught to do anything I could to make the guy miss a shot. When he's about to shoot, I'm going to yell, throw my hands up in his face, all kinds of stuff, short of touching him. In volleyball, that would be considered unsporting conduct, and we don't allow it. Okay. Obviously, you can't go out on the court during play. You're attempting to influence the decision by a referee, disrespect the referee or other match officials. We probably have more disrespect shown to the line judges than anyone else, and we need to enforce that as well. And in fact, you can't disrespectfully address anyone, including your own team. So in some other sports, you'll see a coach, yell at his players, you guys are just bums or whatever. In volleyball, that would be considered unsporting conduct. So we need to make sure the coaches are aware of that. And the volleyball coaches will be. And if you have a new coach, they may not use your preventative officiating to make sure they understand that. We just don't do that in volleyball. But all of these apply to everybody on the bench: coach, players, assistants, etc. Okay. A couple of specific things you can't do. You can't have a bullhorn or anything like that and use that on the bench. One, I don't know what means, but it's in there. It's called holding unauthorized conferences. I'm not sure what that means. If anyone does, I would be interested. I've done some searching. I couldn't find anything. I think it's a leftover from some maybe previous times. Anyway, if the coach sends up a disqualified player to re-enter into a match, that would be unsporting conduct already. And leaving the bench, illegally, taking the team, going outside or whatever while the play is underway, that would be unsporting. So, and then finally, anything that's used to disrupt the set. Now you're going to have to use judgment here, particularly on abuse of the reserve rule. I've never seen that, but I guess it could occur if someone was just trying to delay the game, or I don't know, somehow get an advantage on their opponents by abusing the reserve rule. I guess if every player on the team had to have a reserve for every serve, we would consider that unsporting. All right. Now, those were all things for people on the bench. Players on the court have a little bit different because remember they're playing, but the main thing that you're going to see out there would be where they show disgust with the referee's decision. If they show disgust with their own play, usually you're going to say that's okay. But if that was to take the ball and kick it up into the stands, or hit it at an opponent, something like that, well, that would definitely be unsporting. So we want to just immediately squash that and make sure they realize that's not going to be permitted during the match. One other thing is you could have baiting or taunting. You want to listen to the players as they talk to each other. If you hear something that shouldn't be said out there, we're going to take care of that right then with a meeting with the captain immediately, maybe both captains of the teams if you hear it. So as R1 and R2, you do need to be listening to the players on the court, see what they're saying to each other. In most cases, they all play each other all the time and they're all friends, so we don't have a problem. But if we do have a situation, we want to take care of it right there. Okay, in addition to players on the court, there can be an unsporting conduct involved in the play itself, and that would be where there's contact with an opponent that you deem to be unnecessary and inciting of roughness. It is not a penalty to touch a player on the other team. For instance, if I go up to block, player hits a spike and hits the hands, that's not a problem. Likewise, if I block into their hands, that's not a problem. It has to be you have to deem it as unnecessary and insightful. Okay. In addition, just some kind of crazy things. If you use an opponent's body to gain advantage, so your opponent helps lift you up, or you use the standard or the referee's stand to try to gain some sort of advantage, that would be unsporting conduct, and we want to penalize that. If you deliberately serve prior to the signal for signal for serve by the R1, we want to penalize that, but it has to be deliberate. And I believe I have never seen that where it was deliberately done. I can imagine it, but I've never seen it. And again, this basically things that are used to just try to disrupt the set, either using that reserve rule or excessive requesting for a lineup check over and over. And it's clearly not that they're just confused; it's that they're trying to disrupt the flow of the set. And finally, specifically to the rules, is you can't spit except into a receptacle. So that would be considered unsporting to spit onto the floor. All right, so the penalties for these, we have with classification of the penalties are yellow, red, and then red plus yellow. And for all of these penalties, they're for the entire match. They carry over set to set for the entire match. The yellow, which is a warning, is going to be for the first minor offense. Okay. And what is minor versus serious is going to be your judgment. Okay. And so we have minor, serious, and flagrant. If it's flagrant on the first offense, the player or the coach or whoever will be disqualified. And we'll go through what has to happen then. But they would be disqualified and the team would suffer a loss of rally point. Okay. And that's for the first flagrant, second serious, or third minor offense. Okay. But more likely what you're going to have is you're going to have a yellow card for the first minor offense. And that's a warning, right? And this is per match, not per set. Okay. If we have a second minor offense, right, or a first serious offense, then it's going to be a red card, and that's going to result in a loss of rally point to the opponent. Okay, and then we have the yellow plus red for disqualification. Okay, and they carry over. It's not like the administrative cards, which do not carry over set to set. Now, if we have a really unfortunate situation, we can have a match declared a forfeit. And that's under three conditions. One is if we have an individual that's been disqualified, right? So we have a player that had two serious offenses, one flagrant offense, or those three minor offenses, and they violated the conduct rules again. Remember, they're disqualified. In case of a player, they're most likely going to still be on the bench. I'll go through that in a sec. If they violate the rules again, then clearly they've pretty much lost control of the match, and the team would forfeit the match at that case. The more likely case, and again, not very likely, is that the head coach is disqualified and there are no other authorized school personnel available to take over the team. Okay, so you need authorized school personnel. You need an assistant coach or someone associated with the team, an adult, to take over as head coach. And if that's not available, then the match would be declared a forfeit. And again, also if a team just refuses to play, you could declare a forfeit. But that would be a very, very bad situation. Now, if you do have disqualification, how we handle it is going to be different between players and coaches or other adults. If we have a player that's disqualified, we're going to notify the head coach for the reason for the disqualification, right? Because that player is going to have, because of disqualification, is going to be not allowed to participate in future matches. They're going to have to go through some education, etc. Okay, but the offender is to be removed from the bench only if there's authorized personnel available to supervise them. Otherwise, and preferably, they must stay on the bench. Okay, so it's going to be rare that this occurs, but when it occurs, we want that player to stay on the bench. By rule, they're allowed to leave the bench, but only if they are continuously supervised by other authorized school personnel. So an assistant coach or whatever. Okay. If we have a disqualified coach or other adult, then the offender has to be removed from the premises. They have to leave the gym. And again, if the head coach is disqualified and there's not an additional authorized school personnel available, the match would be declared a forfeit at that time. All right, so how do we do these conduct cards? It differs a little bit depending on who determines the administration. I just want to go through this so that you'll be ready when it occurs. So if the R1 determines there's going to be a conduct penalty, R1 will whistle, right? They're going to signal with a card on the side of the offending team, the yellow, the red, or the yellow and red. They're going to identify the player number or coach using a C or the numbers on the hands. And then they're going to confer with the appropriate, the team captain, if it's appropriate, to indicate why the call was made. So when last year in a match where the captain actually was conferring with the R1 after the conference, the R1 determined that the captain should be issued a card. He whistled, signal with the yellow card, identified the player number, and obviously there was no additional conference with the captain because the captain understood why the card was being issued. Okay. Now, if the R1 whistles on their determination, the R2 is going to also step to the side of the offending team and mirror the signal that the R1 gave for either the yellow, the red, or the red and yellow. And then they need to also verify that the scorer has recorded that conduct card on the score sheet. Okay. When the R2 determines that a conduct card should be issued, the R2 is going to step to the side of the offending team and onto the court. Step one or two steps onto the court. They're going to show the card to the R1 at chest level, either the red, the yellow, or the red and yellow, and then indicate the player number or coach verbally to the R1. Okay. The R1 will then immediately whistle and administer the cards as requested by the R2. So to do that, they're going to whistle. They're going to signal with the cards on the offending team side. They're going to identify player or coach with their hand signals, and then they're going to confer with the captain if appropriate. The R2 is going to mirror with that signal, the signal with the card on the offending team side, and then verify that it's in the score sheet. Okay. One thing that I learned when going through this year is that the R2 actually makes a determination. So when they determine a card is to be issued, the R1 is to immediately whistle and administer the cards requested. Finally, we can have conduct by spectators that could interrupt the match. If that occurs, we are to suspend the match, and we are to have the host management, or what North Carolina calls the game day administrator, to handle the situation. You're going to call timeout. You're going to ask for the host management. If there's no host management or game day administrator available, you're going to ask the head coach of the home team to handle the situation. And as referees, we should not address the spectators directly. I know I really want to sometimes, but we shouldn't address them directly. And when it does occur, you want to act as soon as you can. So the first time you have a problem, go ahead and do it then. Don't wait till it's festered and gotten even worse. Do it the very first time. And these coaches and administrators understand that volleyball at the high school level is part of the school days, part of education, and they'll take care of the situation for us. We don't want to have overly sensitive ears when a parent says, "Oh, ref, come on, that was a lift," or "Didn't she hit the net?" or whatever. We'll hear those. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about here where someone is using profanity or somehow disrupting the set. One of the more common ones is where we'll have some people calling out the player names and numbers and stuff like that, and we want to stop that immediately. That's not in the spirit of the sport. So if that happens, you hear it, you want to go ahead and stop the match and take care of it at that time. If you do have to eject someone, you have to disqualify them, then as soon as you safely can, you're outside the gym, you're in a safe and secure place in your car, wherever, then you want to call the regional supervisor. Call Diane immediately. Make sure she's aware of the situation and what happened, because you are going to have to file a report, but make sure you call her so she's got the heads up. Because disqualifications are so rare in volleyball, there will be repercussions to, no doubt, the head coach and the player involved, if a player is involved. And then there is a form you have to fill out. As long as it's a North Carolina High School Athletic Association sanctioned match. If it is, then we've got to go fill out the form here at the website I've got. All right, that's the end of clinic number 5. Thank you for watching. As always, if you have any sort of questions, corrections, or comments, let me know. I appreciate it very much. Bye-bye.